Washington, D.C. That's where 184 died, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where 40 died. Those ceremonies will take place in light of what's currently happening in Florida due to Hurricane Irma. Many without power this day, also damage done to homes and infrastructure, including the flooding that's taking place. We're going to talk about those topics and others on this Open Phones. And if you want to call in and comment, here's how you can do so. 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, and 202-748-8002 for independents. If you want to post during this Open Phones on our social media channels, you can do so as well. On Twitter, find us at C-SPAN-WJ, and on our Facebook page, you can also find us at facebook.com/C-SPAN. The Tampa Bay Times, on its cover today, takes a look at what is the after effects of much going on in Florida and still going on. Slammed is the headline, with the subheads: Irma's wind and surge strike hard, cutting power to millions, and Tampa Bay gets weakened but still dangerous, according to the hurricane. That's the front page of the Tampa Bay Times this morning in relation to what's going on with Irma. Several pieces today in the New York Times and other papers when it takes a look at this anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. This is Ariel Dorfman in the New York Times this morning. Remembering the Disappeared is the piece in which he writes, of the 2,753 victims of the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, no physical trace has been found for 1,112 of them. Thus, for 40% of those who died that day, no remains have been returned to their families. In the aftermath of the carnage, some people exhibited photos, family snapshots of those who had vanished and remained unaccounted for, despite the efforts of the authorities. What could be more natural than to seek information that would at least offer clarity and closure? Surcease to the mind and heart. As long as there was no body to mourn, there will always be a desperate shed of belief that perhaps the loved one might somehow have survived. Any bereavement is hard enough, but when someone has disappeared, seemingly annihilated from the face of the earth, it becomes unbearable. Ariel Dorfman continues on, and you can read that this morning in the pages of the New York Times. Just a couple of bits of information there, not only regarding to the 9/11 attacks, but also to the after effects of Hurricane Irma. Again, we've been showing you photos from the Getty Image Service talking about the destruction that's going on, still currently going as far as Irma still taking place in Florida. And we invite you to comment on those topics as others. 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, and 202-748-8002 is how you can participate in this Open Phones. You can also post at C-SPAN-WJ on our Twitter feed and also at our Facebook page at facebook.com/C-SPAN. Up first on the phones is Robert from Baltimore, Maryland. Robert, go ahead. You're on.
Hi, Pedro. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for allowing me to get through this anniversary of 9/11. I want to say that when the original incident took place, and I was a school teacher teaching in Baltimore City, there was sheer pandemonium in our building. We didn't know what was going to be the next target and so forth. Yet, having done research since then, I guess people probably will, live with me as being so-called conspiracy theorists. But in my research, I found that pretty much, for the most part, though, that was an inside job. Those people in power, the people who really run the government, I'm talking about the people who are above the president, they know who did it. They know that for the most part it was an inside job. I don't want to go down that long trajectory, the rabbit hole, but at the same time, if America truly wants to show its courage, then we need to have the courage to prosecute the people who are really, really behind the scenes. I'm talking about the people who were the bankers, the people who, for the most part, were responsible for doing this. Because, again, we all know what it was. That so-called Warren Commission, that was a total sham. Thank you so much.
Here is Jack, Providence, Rhode Island, Democrats line.
Yeah, hi. This is Jack calling. I'm calling, first of all, that gentleman made some sense there. The hurricane, now it's considered a Category 1. The amount of coverage was absolutely amazing. Now, I'd like to see someone compare it to Hurricane Andrew. Somebody stated that this hurricane, they called it a nuclear hurricane. I can't recall the name. People get a little tired of the overhype. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of heavy rain, a lot of flooding, But this was no nuclear attack. This was not an Operation Barbarossa when Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union. And now getting back to 9/11, Saudi Arabian money was involved in that too. But we're friends with them because everything is controlled by the money.
Let's go to Ellijay, Georgia. That's where Joe is. Republican line. Joe, good morning. Go ahead.
Pedro, great. I got 3 quick points. I've got a nephew, Hunter Hill, running for governor. He's a great conservative Republican. 2, we've got a great project started by a wonderful lady named Ginger Howard on the Republican National Committee to motivate and fire up millions of young people, teach them about free enterprise and capitalism and how bad socialism is evidenced by Venezuela. And then we have a great United States Senator, David Perdue, who's real close to Donald Trump. And I had lunch with David, a 2-hour lunch with him, and he's going to lead the Trump agenda to get the economic program through. And Pedro, I believe this will lead to huge Republican landslide wins and for the next 20 to 30 years, because this is going to give us the great economy in history, the greatest economy in history, when we cut those taxes for all Americans. So I'm really fired up and energized about all 3 of those things. My nephew Hunter would be a great governor for Georgia. I think Ginger Howard is a great leader for young people, and David Perdue, I think, is going to be the #1 senator in Washington to get the Trump agenda through Congress.
Again, it's open phones, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, Independents, 202-748-8002, Caspian, Michigan. Independent line. Hello.
Yes, good morning. I'd just like to make a comment. I don't know who's right and who's wrong here. I have a smartphone here, and when this hurricane started coming across lower Florida, I had Key West on my weather channel and also Miami and a few other towns down there. And the highest wind readings I got going into Key West was 75 miles an hour. And 50 miles an hour in Miami, and I didn't see any of readings that was even close to 100 miles an hour. Now, grant you, it was devastating down there. The winds do a lot of destruction, and maybe these wind readings are getting maybe 200 feet up in the air possibly, but I would just like to know, who's right, my smartphone or the news? And it's kind of like questionable. I don't know which to believe. And as it progressed on into Sunday and stuff, I was watching my smartphone, and the highest readings I ever got was 75 miles an hour in Key West. And now it's all dropped down again. And Naples and that, they didn't even get maybe 35 miles an hour winds, which is still, pretty windy. I mean, and it does suck up a lot of water and drop it off, and I'm aware of all that, but I'm just kind of like, who's right here, my smartphone or the news channel? And these other callers that sometimes call in and say these phenomenons happen because of like these when they see these jets going through the sky with these trails, those are not chemical trails. Believe me, I was in the service, Air Force, and even before that, it's the vapor. It's cold air, with hot air, and I believe probably you know that too, but I understand you can't really make too much of a comment, but those are not chemical trails. Those are just vapor trails going across the sky, and there's nothing to do with any kind of chemicals that they're dropping in the atmosphere. I'm up here in the Upper Peninsula. You wouldn't believe the people that believe these chemtrails up here.
Okay, that's Robert calling us on this open phones this day. Again, it's 202-748-8000 for Democrats, Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002. On this day of 9/11, several memorials, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, taking place, and you can see them on C-SPAN. The one in New York City, that will start at 8 o'clock today. Watch it on our network C-SPAN 2 at cspan.org, also courtesy of our C-SPAN radio app. When you go to events at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at the location of the Flight 93 National Memorial, that will be at 9:45. You can watch that on C-SPAN 3, as well as the website and the radio app. And when it comes to the events at the Pentagon, 9:30 is where you can see that. You can watch it on our main channel, C-SPAN. Also, go to cspan.org for all that information of all the events we are taking in today, not only when it comes to 9/11, but other events too. David Von Dreely, Von Dreely of the Washington Post this morning writes op-ed, Irma reminds us of our limits, saying that on September 8th of 1900, a hurricane drove 15 feet of storm surge over the thriving city of Galveston, Texas, maximum elevation 8.7 feet. At least 6,000 people were killed in what remains the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. Most of them had less than a day's warning that the storm was approaching and had no inkling of its power. I thought of that when I read a report by the Associated Press as a storm of similar intensity rolled over the coast of Cuba and headed to Florida. The AP quoted a businessman from St. Petersburg, Florida, who was irritated that the Hurricane Irma was heading toward his town and not toward Miami as predicted. Quote, for 5 days we were told it was going to be on the East Coast, and then 24 hours before it hits, we're told now it's coming up the West Coast, a man complained. As usual, the weathermen complain. I don't know why they're paid. David Von Dreely goes on to say, arguably they're paid for the thousands of lives they may have saved by sounding warnings that the people of Galveston never received. And thanks to radar and satellites and weather planes and forecasting supercomputers, to name a few of the advances of the past century, the world watched for days as Irma whirled steadily westward across the Atlantic Ocean, a slow-motion bowling ball headed for the pins. The speed of its winds, the spread of its bands, the pressure of its eye were tracked like vitals in an intensive care unit. That's today's Washington Post. David Von Dreely writing that article. Mike in Germantown, Maryland, Independent Line.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I think it's important that we keep in mind 9/11 and remember that we can't believe the government conspiracy theory that 19 hijackers hijacked these planes, some of whom were later found out to be alive. The buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. I would recommend watching Loose Change that shows how the buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. Jet fuel cannot melt steel. The only two high-rises that have ever gone down were number 1 and 2, and building number 7 that was not hit by an airplane. So watch the movie Loose Change. You can watch it for free on the internet, and that'll explain how this happened. It was an inside job.
Washington, D.C., here is Matt. Hello.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. My comment really is to echo the caller previously on. If you look at the physical evidence of what happened on 9/11, it's not add up that fire could have destroyed World Trade Center Tower 1 or 2. Look at the pyroclastic clouds that were formed when the towers fell at free fall speed, mind you. And then I would encourage all the listeners to look up World Trade Center 7. It was a third tower that fell on 9/11 at about 5 p.m. No plane hit that. And that's my comment. Thank you, and God bless America.
On our social media pages, you can post on Twitter at CSPANWJ and on our Facebook page on facebook.com/CSPAN. You can call us on the phone lines as well. Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002. Matt, that was Matt. Here is Andrew. Andrew in Weaverville, North Carolina, Independent Line. Andrew in North Carolina.
Hey, Pedro.
You're on. Go ahead. Andrew in North Carolina, are you there?
I'm here.
Go ahead.
I'm here. Sorry. Hey, with regard to that article you just read with the weather and that guy commenting about how the news doesn't match, I don't know. If you go to the actual National Hurricane Center, they have real good information, and it matches as well as they can do what's actually going to happen. I think that, I don't know, to sell commercials or whatever, the people on the TV, they try to sensationalize things. Anyway, that's it.
So, Andrew, what kind of information did you learn as you were watching the National Hurricane Center? What drove you to go to its website?
Well, I used to have to keep track of what storms were going to do to figure out if we would have to move aircraft or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I just started, paying attention to what the National Hurricane Center webpage says. It's nhc.com, I think. I don't know. Anyway.
As far as the coverage of the storm, what do you think of it?
It drives me crazy. Like I said, my wife and I argue about it. She thinks I'm being a contrarian. But I think, like I said, they sensationalize it because, I don't know, they have to sell ad space or something. I think the bad side of that is that you have people who are expecting, some, I don't know, Armageddon-like storm to come. Nothing much happens, or it's not as bad as they were told it's going to be, and then that causes them to be nonchalant the next time a big storm comes.
What's your wife's opinion?
She thinks I'm an idiot.
Well, of the coverage though, what is her opinion of that?
Oh, I think she, like a lot of other people I know, they enjoy it because it's like it's entertainment for them. Like I said, it's very sensational.
The New York Times this morning, by the way, Sopan Deb, in the pages of it, takes a look at the reporting that's taking place during Hurricane Irma and other hurricanes too, talking about the role of the reporter. As the winds rise, so does debate over the daring do of TV storm reporters. He writes this, saying the tradition of television crews standing in the middle of a dangerous storm goes back decades, reflecting the hunger to be on the scene for a nationally significant event, but the news value of dangerous stand-ups in which a correspondent is seen in a field talking to a camera is increasingly being questioned, particularly with the rise of social media. Some critics wonder whether they are unnecessary and over-sensationalized spectacles, especially in cases where correspondents are struggling to deliver information, but those same field reporters insist that the visuals from the storms are essential to persuading people to take hurricane threats seriously and getting them to leave the area. This is Joseph in Old Saybrook, Connecticut.
Yes, thank you for C-SPAN. When I look over the scenes of devastation in the Caribbean, particularly Barbuda, St. Martin, even Cuba, I think, well, who's going to provide the funds to try to rebuild those islands and those regions? Yes, and even the Florida Keys. When I think about that, and I think about who the president is right now, I have to conclude that having Donald Trump as president at this particular time in world history is precisely the wrong man for the job. With his extreme brand of American nationalism and wanting to throw off our neighbors, and who wants to live with another 6 months or 18 months or years of chaos in the Caribbean on the southern border when those people realize that their islands are not going to be rebuilt in a timely fashion?
So is it the U.S. responsibility then to particularly target and care for those islands?
Oh, I think it is, actually, yes.
Why so?
Because this country has a military presence in the Caribbean and likes to see governments there that support American policies. So to the extent that we devote resources to providing that umbrella, that military and social safety net, an umbrella, so to speak, I think we also have an obligation to see a relative stable political and social regime prevail in the Caribbean basin.
Joseph from Connecticut off of Twitter this morning, Mylan Burke talking about September 11th, saying it was on that day in 2001. I was in an airplane heading to Dallas. Nothing was going on when we took off, and it was all over when we landed. Bill King saying we stood outside at work and watched the second plane hit the towers. I will never forget that. You can share your thoughts on Twitter about 9/11 or the events in Irma or anything else on this open phones if you'd like. Or you can call us on the phone lines too. 202-748-8000 for Democrats, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002. As we talk about those things, other events in the news, particularly as of yesterday, Hillary Clinton conducting an interview on CBS's Sunday morning program, talking about aspects of her campaign in 2016 and things that she discussed on that, including the state of the campaign after the release of that letter from the former FBI Director James Comey. Here's part of that interview from yesterday.
I think my general election prospects were so badly damaged because of that even though I was starting to come back, it was not enough time to overcome it. But even though that was the primary blow to my campaign at the very end, it has to be looked at in context with the Russians weaponizing information, negative stories about me, this whole WikiLeaks beginning to leak in early October of John Podesta's emails, which if you've read them all, they're pretty anodyne, but they were taken out of context. Stories were made up about them. We now know Facebook was taking money from Russian companies to run negative stories about me. If you look at all of this, yes, it affected me and my campaign, but I am more concerned now going forward that we haven't come to grips with what it means for future elections. I would also add that the voter suppression that we now know had been in the works and really put into effect in a lot of states like Wisconsin, North Carolina, et cetera, played a role. And then let's not forget sexism and misogyny, which are endemic to our society.
And that's off the CBS News website if you want to watch that interview for yourself. In other political news, the House Financial Services panel, has announced that they are going to hold a hearing on the Equifax information breach that compromised the personal information of millions of Americans. The chairman said on Friday, quote, "This is obviously a very serious and troubling situation. Our committee has already begun preparations for a hearing." That's Representative Jeb Hensarling, Texas Republican, said in a statement about the breach. Committee staffers received a briefing from Equifax employees earlier Friday. They are working towards scheduling a hearing date, according to a panel spokesperson telling The Hill, quote, given the important information role the credit scores play in the lives and financial futures of hardworking Americans, Congress must diligently examine the way our credit reporting agencies are operating and impose additional statutory and regulatory reforms. That's Representative Maxine Waters of California, the committee's ranking Democrat, in a statement on Friday. It's open phones. Lines will be there if you want to give us a call on topics. Laura from Troy, Michigan, Republican line. Go ahead. You're next.
Good morning. Today we're celebrating 9/11, or not celebrating because it was a horrible thing. My niece, Lisa Marie Terry, died in Tower 1, and we have heard that most of the people were from Saudi Arabia or had Saudi Arabian connections. For a number of years, we have entertained that government, watched President Bush holding hands with one of the top officials in the government. And, of course, the Saudis are intelligent. When Trump went to Europe the first time, they wined and dined him and gave him a gold necklace and things of that nature. The Saudi Arabians, most people don't pay attention, are decimating the Yemenis that are below them on the map, if you look at the map. I strongly object to our American government giving so much attention and fawning and whatever words you want to use to that government, because they are responsible for one of the worst tragedies in our United States history. In addition to the fact, most people don't realize that the Saudi form of religion, Wahhabism, teaches hate for our country. I think people should pay more attention to the good things that we do for that government. Good question mark.
So, Laura, before you go, tell us about your niece.
Lisa Marie Terry, 42 years old, vice president, one of the many vice presidents of Marsh McLennan, who is a worldwide insurance agency in New York City. Lisa lived in Michigan. She went to New York to deliver a paper and was planning on leaving to go to Hawaii for a 3-month part of her job. She had a very specialized expertise in insurance, and so, of course, we miss her immensely. And she was a very ambitious, very bright young lady, and it's just a tragedy. And I guess one thing, if you allow me to mention, it's very distasteful to families of 9/11 for them to be showing these towers with people jumping out of them. I can't tell you how many people ask me, was your niece one of those? Do you think that she might have jumped out of the tower? What difference does it make?
Laura.
People are insensitive to the feelings of the families because we mourn them forever. And
Laura, I want to thank you for for telling about your niece. Sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing that with us. We'll go next to Andy. Andy in New York, Democrats line. Go ahead.
Good morning.
You're on, Andy. Good morning. Go ahead.
Yes, I think there's no doubt that the President Trump is the worst ever president in the U.S. history. We have to impeach him as soon as possible. As he become president, we face the natural disaster every day. Every day we lost our people in a flood, in a wildfire, in disaster, in a Miami flood. As you see today, we lost every people. This is because I think it's a natural disaster because of the Trump disaster decision. This is because of his accompany with the Saudi Arabia to kill innocent people in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in every poor people. Okay, I think we have to impeach him as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Off of Twitter, this is Ghost Eagle Dean saying, give it 10 years and Miami will be a lost cause due to sea level rise from man-made climate change and its effects on hurricanes. Kevin Denver saying 9/11 ushered in the police state and the age of domestic spying and perpetual martial law, adding the word sad with 2 exclamation points. Sandra from Massachusetts, you are next. Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. My brother is down in Tampa Bay. I'm still waiting to hear from him and his family. I heard last night about 6 o'clock, and he said there was tornadoes all around him. Anyway, I wanted to think about the North Koreans setting off that bomb, maybe disturbing the weather, causing the earth to shake, causing these phenomena to happen. We have to stop this atomic crap from happening. Otherwise, more and more are going to happen. And on top of that, there's going to be so many homeless. I've been helping homeless out. Please, people, put out your arms and help these people. They haven't got homes. They haven't got things. Give them the ability to help. And be there for you, too. God forbid to all of you. May God take care of all of you.
So the last time you heard your brother was yesterday then?
Yes. Yesterday, and still waiting. I keep calling, and his phone goes into mode or whatever, and it says, they get back to you and all that, but nothing's happening, so I don't know. And he likes to be on the phone, so who knows?
Sandra in Massachusetts on our independent line. We'll hear next from Dan. Dan is in Georgetown, Massachusetts. Independent line as well. Dan, good morning.
Good morning. I just want to first say something. You had a little clip from Hillary Clinton there, and it's just astonishing to me some of the things that have been revealed since this messy election. In Clinton's State Department, apparently like $6 trillion have gone missing. There was an AP report out about that, how the government is missing $6.7 trillion through the, I guess, DOD, which is state, and the State Department. And what's kind of ironic about that is on September 10th, the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld said that there was an enemy of the United States. It was the Defense Department, and he said because they were missing $2.3 trillion. This is a fact. Anyone could look it up on YouTube. And then the following day, on September 11th, the auditor for the Pentagon, his office was hit by what we're told is a plane. So, people need to be strong enough to just spend a little bit of their time pro bono and look at 9/11. We were completely misled, and it's only been substantiated how misled we've been over time. It's ridiculous.
John is next in Michigan. Democrats line.
Good morning. I'm calling to make a comment about climate change. We have a president in office who does not believe in climate change, but he believes in fake news. That's the only comment that I have. Thank you.
So as far as climate change, where do you stand on the issue?
Anybody that doesn't believe in science, there's something wrong with them, sir. All right? Science is science. Fake news is fake news.
So when you say believe the science, particularly what science are you pointing at?
Man has contributed to climate change, and the scientists, 80% of the scientists believe that.
That's John in Michigan. In other news, the Washington Times picks up a story about the Trump Justice Department saying they've once again cleared the former IRS senior executive Lois Lerner of criminal liability stemming from Tea Party targeting. In a letter to top Republicans, Assistant Attorney General Stephen Boyd said they reviewed the case and concluded there isn't enough evidence to charge Ms. Lerner, who was at the center of the targeting. Mr. Boyd said the new review included lawyers who only recently joined the department and weren't part of the Obama administration's earlier decision. Quote, after this process, the department determined that reopening the investigation would not be appropriate based on the available evidence. That's according to Mr. Boyd. Howard is next in Missouri, Republican line. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wanting to know, does it take like a disaster for the Republicans and the Democrats to come together to finally work together? You know, they don't work together. They don't even show up at things together. But yet, when something a terrible disaster happens, everybody starts working together. Well, isn't it what's going on, with 9/11? That was a terrible disaster, And another thing, you think about 9/11, 911, that was an emergency.
So Howard, a couple of things. When you say working together, when you heard about last week probably that President Trump working along with the Democrats as far as the debt ceiling and things, do you think that's a good sign of working together between Republicans and Democrats?
I believe wholeheartedly that it's where they decided that they're in such an upheaval that they need new blood. They need new people coming in to work together. Donald Trump has no experience. So he's like learning on the job. So how are we supposed to get the new people in to learn, how to do government work?
So, but along the lines of working with Democratic leadership, you were okay with that move by the president?
Well, I think, he's not going to get anything done just by himself. That's been proven, that's been proven. And as far as the news goes, the fake news stuff and all that, that's just a filler. You know what I mean by a filler? It's like something to get your eyes off of what's really going on, the lack of people working together. If my house was on fire, I wouldn't go on a vacation.
Okay, that's Howard in Missouri. It will be 8 o'clock today, this morning actually, where you can watch the 9/11 memorial ceremony that will take place in New York City. at the Freedom Tower location. Watch that on C-SPAN 2. Also on our website and our radio app. We've been showing you pictures from that ceremony. We'll continue to do so throughout the day. At the Pentagon, the 9/11 Remembrance Ceremony will take place at 9:30. Besides our website and app, you can watch that on our main channel, C-SPAN. And then you can also watch events in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the site of the Flight 93 National Memorial. 9:45 is that event. You can see it live on C-SPAN 3. Alan from Brooklyn, New York, Democrats line. You're next up.
Good morning, and thank you. I want to be especially sensitive because this is the 9/11 anniversary, and tying together observations about the recent threat of nuclear weapons coming from Korea. And then there was a comment by the mayor of Miami when Irma was approaching that this was going to be a nuclear hurricane, meaning a nuclear-sized destructive force. And the attention that we give to the potential for a Korean leader to inflict harm on our country, and the attention we have given to our victimization from the 9/11 attacks, which was appropriate. It was a direct attack on us, and we were the victims of this malicious assault, should be compared to the attention we are not giving to our role in affecting the climate of the entire planet. And I am very sensitive to the suffering of the people in Texas and the people in Florida, but many of the worst climate-denying politicians in our country come from those states. People in Florida who, in effect, said that their officials could not use any vocabulary connected with climate change in their official actions, in effect, a kind of propaganda-like censorship of the scientific truth. And this is not just something that's wrong for us because of the possibility of other hurricanes like Harvey and Irma affecting American states in the future, but it should sensitize us to the fact that we, as the biggest emitters per capita in the world, are opposing this kind of nuclear hurricane threat on all of the rest of the planet. And if we intend to avoid the possibility of other people maliciously attacking us, whether by 9/11 type terror or by Korean type nuclear assaults in the future, then we have to be a little more sensitive to the fact that we are affecting many other parts of the world with nuclear scale harm by not addressing climate change. And I do not believe that Trump doesn't believe in climate science. I believe that he is saying that to please people in the carbon industries who want to avoid liability for their responsibility.
Okay, that's Alan in New York. The Washington Post reporting that the president will meet with Senator Tim Scott on Wednesday. It notes that the senator who said that President Trump's, quote, moral authority was compromised by his response to the white supremacist-fueled violence in Charlottesville last month is set to meet with him Wednesday to discuss issues of race and race relations, said two people familiar with the meeting. Scott, who had been sharply critical of the president and his rhetoric on issues of race, had expressed interest in meeting with the president before the violence, the people said. But that get-together took on newfound urgency after the violence in Charlottesville. The last section of this story, by the way, notes that Senator Scott plans to use part of his audience with the president to tell his personal story, as it were, about which he had previously spoken. His grandfather dropped out of third grade, never learned to read, and spent much of his life picking cotton. His mother raised him as a single parent, working long hours at a nursing home. Senator Scott and the president are also expected to discuss poverty among black Americans and issues facing historically black universities. That meeting's set to take place on Wednesday. Alida, Belleville, Michigan, Democrats line.
Hi, Pedro, and good morning, America. I don't want anyone that's listening to take this the wrong way. Of course, my heart goes out for the hurricane victims in Harvey and Irma, but I really do feel that the media, the news, this was overkill regarding these incidents with the hurricanes. Now, I live in Michigan. They don't cover the snowstorm and all the, what happens here. But I'm in Michigan. I don't have to live that what the people in Florida and Texans live on a day-to-day basis. I need the media and the weather. It was overkill the last 7 days, 24 hours, as though there's no other news to report, just like you reported about the Equifax, credit card stuff, credit scores. That's important. We haven't heard anything about that. This was overkill. Now, my heart goes out for all of my fellow citizens that's going through these hurricanes. However, when it comes to my taxpayer dollars, if the rich people want to keep building and live and businesses on the coastline next to the beach, I don't want my tax money going towards paying for them to build another high-rise and live on the ocean. We know it's climate change. So that's one point. Then let's talk about the forest fires out west. Our firefighters are dying just because rich people want to live up in the mountains and they're fighting fires for 4 or 5 rich people homes. They shouldn't be living there. And I mean, in America, our taxpayers should not be paying rich people to live like that.
Okay.
Now,
that's Alita in Michigan. Let's go to Dan next. He's in Missouri, Republican line.
Wow, Pedro. Kind of stirred the pot up here this morning. About 90-some% is reality, and the other is just confusion. What gets me is from the government. There was a did his last.
Dan, I apologize. The connection that you're giving us is not that strong of a one. Can we see if maybe you can get a better line on that, and let's see if we can give you another try once you get that better connection established. In the meantime, let's try Patty. Patty is in Sterling, Virginia. Patty, good morning to you. Go ahead, you are on.
Well, first thing, on the anniversary of 9/11, I'd like to extend the deepest sympathies and blessings to the families of the lost loved ones from 9/11. And I think, the one guy that called in that was full of conspiracy theories, including about 9/11, just totally dishonor the families, the people that were lost. I mean, I live outside Washington, that plane that went into the Pentagon that killed some people I know in the Pentagon and also some people I knew on the plane, that actually happened. So it just kind of makes me sick when I hear that. But it does go to this central problem we seem to be having politically and socially regarding people understanding or perceiving a truth based on such a diverse set of news sources that a lot of people just don't really know that there is some truth. And the comments from Alan from New York on climate change, for example, there are many, many people in this country who listen to news sources that tell them lies about climate change. Meaning that they deny the science, they come up with all sorts of other explanations, and I think that is a very deep threat to our country. And I guess I wanted to just stress on the anniversary of 9/11, knowledge, education, both hard science knowledge and soft science knowledge, including about violent extremism and how it can affect us and how we need to help contribute to productive solutions surrounding that, the causes of violent extremism. Just wish people would just read some good books instead of listening to weird conspiracy news sources.
Okay, let's go to Mustafa in Washington, D.C., Independent Line.
Good morning. How you doing, Pedro? It's always a pleasure hearing your voice. And good morning, family. And unfortunately, about 9/11, things happened on that particular day. But my issue is that why is this country constantly policing everyone else in reference to having a nuclear program when this country and Russia have the largest nuclear programs in the world? So why people had constantly judging other folks dealing with their issues with a nuclear program when this country is the largest, and like I said, Russia. Thank you for taking my call.
That's Mustafa in Washington, D.C. Jim Comey, the topic of Hillary Clinton from her interview with PBS, with CBS. Jim Comey, also the topic of Steve Bannon, the former White House strategist for President Trump, who conducted an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes, in which he talked about a number of things. But one of the things that came out of that interview, which you can see online, particularly deals with Jim Comey. Mr. Bannon saying that the firing of Jim Comey by the president was the biggest mistake, quote, maybe in modern political history, a wide-ranging topic. So here's a bit of that interview from Steve Bannon yesterday.
It is also true, many say, and you're a smart guy, that if James Comey had not been fired, we would not have the Mueller investigation. True?
I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any doubt that if James Comey had not been fired, we would not have a special counsel. Yes.
So we would not have the Mueller investigation.
Would not have the Mueller investigation. Would not have the Mueller investigation in the breadth that clearly Mr. Mueller is going.
Do you believe?
Because I think it's a very directional. I think directionally it's a very different.
Do you believe Mr. Mueller should be fired?
No, I do not.
Has there been discussions in the White House about firing him?
I would not tell you about discussions in the White House, but I would tell you nothing I ever heard like that.
Someone said to me that you described the firing of James Comey, you're a student of history, as the biggest mistake in political history.
That would probably be too bombastic even for me, but maybe modern political history.
Mr. Bannon also commented on leadership in the House and Senate and other topics too. Those available courtesy of CBS if you want to check that out for yourself. In the Wall Street Journal this morning, when it comes to efforts on Capitol Hill, takes a look at the spending bill that's currently being debated and what it might do for campaign finance riders, as they're known. It says this is Cesare Podkol, saying that under one deregulatory measure in the spending bill, in the spending package, churches may be able to contribute to candidates without fear of losing their tax-exempt status, furthering President Donald Trump's promise to get rid of and totally destroy a law that forbids such activity. Corporations will be able to ask their employees to donate to unlimited numbers of trade associations, political action groups, instead of limiting employee solicitations to one group per year. The other measures in the bill would include to prevent the IRS and the Securities and Exchange Commission from implementing rules that would affect political activities of 501c4 nonprofits and publicly traded corporations, respectively. And the government would still be prohibited from requiring federal contractors to disclose their political contributions and their campaign expenditures. The Wall Street Journal picks up that story. You can see it on its pages this morning, on the front page of the New York Times this morning. It also takes a look at the Trump administration, particularly when it comes to social issues. This is Ben Protis and others writing that the Trump administration opened the door to allowing more firearms on federal lands. It scrubbed references to LGBTQ youth from the description of the federal program for victims of sex trafficking. And on the advice of religious leaders, it eliminated funding to international groups that provide abortion. While these initiatives lack the fanfare some of the president's high-profile proclamations, like his ban on transgender people in the military, they point to a fundamental repurposing of the federal bureaucracy to promote conservative social priorities. The aggressive regulatory effort, which runs counter to the Trump administration's less is more credo about government meddling, has led to policy changes related to gun ownership, gay rights, reproductive choices, immigration, and other divisive political issues, according to a New York Times review of government documents and court records, including interviews with more than 4 people involved or briefed on the efforts. That's at the New York Times. We'll go next to Al. Al's in Rhode Island, Republican line. Go ahead.
Pedro, good morning. I'm glad I'm following that girl that was from, I think, Washington, talking about climate change. The biggest thing that causes climate change, and it's fact, and none of the scientists talk about it, is overpopulation. Your poor countries continually have children. In Africa, the average family has 11 children. You see it on TV. They can't feed one person. The poor baby is all stomach's blown up. He got tears in his eyes. South America, 6 to 7 children per family, which they can't afford. Rio de Janeiro, the mobs are taking over the cities and the towns. They're robbing and stealing everybody. So overpopulation. Indonesia, 8 kids per family. Taiwan, the same thing. They're overfishing our oceans. They're overhunting everything that's on land to kill. In Africa, they're shooting the elephants. There's none left. So overpopulation makes them. They have to get more wood to burn fires.
Okay, Al, let me leave it there only because I want to point our viewers to the Vice President Mike Pence as he is on his way toward events of 9/11. Particularly, he is headed to Shanksville, Pennsylvania, to participate in those events there. That's one of the 3 ceremonies that we will show you on C-SPAN today, by the way. If you go to our website, you can find out more about when, not only in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where the Vice President will participate, but New York City and the Pentagon, too. So as we show you that, we will go to our next call. This is Mary Jane. She's in Massachusetts, independent line.
Good morning.
Hi.
I am really concerned about the attitude of the woman from Michigan here on the day of 9/11 and the horror storms in Florida and Texas. She has no feeling in her heart for those who have been affected this way. She's just going on who's rich and who's not rich. When I was a child, I heard the story about a group of people with extra long arms who couldn't feed themselves, and they were all upset. And in the other room, it was the same thing, except they fed each other, and they were happy. We need to take care of each other in order for our country to survive. Thank you.
Richard in Connecticut, independent line. Hi.
Yes, Pedro, how are you? And thanks to C-SPAN. As far as climate change is concerned, I totally agree with climate change, but I think that there are a few causes of that, and that's internal explosions within the core of the Earth itself and from the sun. Now, the people who say that mankind causes most of it, I would like, because they say it's strictly a science, and it is, what percentage of climate change is caused, what percentage is caused by human beings, by the people who deliver the carbons in the atmosphere? What percentage? I mean, is it like 10%? Is it 5%, 3%? They say they're scientists, so they should come up with a figure. 20%? I'll believe that when they say, 10%, 15%, 20%, and so forth. But come up with a figure. As far as 9/11 is concerned, there were many signs before with 9/11. We had the garage bombing in 1993. We had the destroyer that was hit. I think it was 1998. We had our diplomats were hit in Sudan and here and there. And during that time, we could have hit Osama bin Laden 2 and possibly 3 times, and it was turned down by the administration in the 90s at that particular time. We had him in our sights, and we let him go. Unfortunate. Thank you very much, Pedro.
That's Richard in Connecticut. Don't have time to read it, but USA Today has a story about the town of Gander, Newfoundland in Canada. You'll remember that on 9/11, several planes were stuck in the air. Several of those planes landed in the town, took in a total of 6,700 strangers, fed them, took care of them, clothed them in some cases. And it goes to kind of highlight what the folks in this town of the small Canadian town on an island of the North Atlantic Ocean did when it comes to those people who were stuck flying as the events of 9/11 happened. So you can read that in the pages of USA Today this morning. The White House, as it's custom on this day, puts the flag at half-mast, half-staff, and then that was also part of the other activities that were going on there. There is the White House flag as it flies. Let's go to Kim in Iowa. Democrats line. Kim, good morning.
Good morning. I was wondering about, I live in a rural area, and a lot of my people and friends believe in this fake news stuff. Though, like I just heard a gentleman earlier, I think he was from Missouri, said North Korea set up an atomic bomb, and that started the hurricane. This fake news has to stop. 9/11 is real. Climate change is real. We can see with our own eyes, and these are good people. just stop believing everything they see on the internet. It's hurt our democracy. That's all I have to say.
So as far as people who, you talked about the people who listen to this type, what as far as your news sources, where do you go as far as getting information?
I go to C-SPAN, I go to MSNBC, and I go to CNN. I listen to ABC and watch ABC. I love ABC and CBS and all the local news. They've been around for over 50 years. These other news cycles on my Facebook, I'd seen some relic that I never heard of, and I just don't look at that.
Let's hear from Keith. Keith is in Warren, Massachusetts, Republican line. Good morning, Keith. How are you?
Hello, Pedro. First of all, there's all 9/11 and storm people. Climate change, I think we're still doing our part. I think the only thing Trump really stopped was paying other countries to do something which do nothing. We're doing the same things we've been doing all along. The only question I had over and above that was, I called you a while back. You put me on hold for a minute, and I had hung up. I didn't know if you asked for me again. I was referring back to the third or the fourth day of August in the Boston area. There were a large group of registered motor vehicle employees that were caught selling. It was on the news, only once though. It just flashed on for one morning, a couple of times, and it was gone. But there was a lot of people that were actual employees of the registered motor vehicles selling IDs to illegals. That they were able to vote, licenses, get benefits, everything. And it just disappeared. I'm just wondering if, and I'm trying to get a hold, I keep calling them. I don't have internet access. I'm disabled. But I've been calling like Mike Pence, everybody I can think of. But there was the 3rd or the 4th of August, and they actually were selling IDs $2,000-$3,000 a pop. And I haven't heard anything else about it. I wish somebody would bring it up.
Okay. That's Keith in Warren, Massachusetts. We've shown you pictures this morning of the effects of Hurricane Irma, particularly as it goes through Florida. One of those areas affected was Miami and the surrounding area. Joining us on the phone to give us an update on the condition of the locality and what happens next is Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, Republican of Florida, serves the 25th District. Representative, thanks for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. The cell communication isn't very good, so I hope you can hear me.
I can. Thank you very much. Give us a status of report of what your area has gone through. What do you think happens now as far as recovery?
Well, look, some of the areas that I represent, including, for example, Everglades City and Immokalee, were hit exceedingly hard. I have an office in that's the western part of the district that I represent. And so we're still in the process of trying to get all the data, but obviously massive power outages, storm surge in Florida City was rather significant. So flooding, and so for example, Immokalee is a relatively poor part of the state of Florida. It's a small city community that's a lot of agriculture. There's a lot of trailers and mobile homes there as well. So. I fear that that area that has been hit rather significantly will have a difficult recovery. But just make no mistake. Look, the people of Florida are resilient. We've been through similar incidents, maybe not this powerful. We'll get over this, but right now it's a time to just help each other. So I've been in touch. Last night I was in touch with the mayors of different communities, particularly in the western part of the peninsula. They have been ready. The governor, by the way, has been phenomenal. He's been in touch with the mayors, the different mayors, multiple times a day to make sure that everything was ready. So, Florida is as ready as any state for something like this, but this is going to be there's going to be a lot of rebuilding that has to take place. Representative, what's the role of the federal government at this stage? And have you heard from the White House, particularly directly from President Trump? I have not heard, but again, I remember communication was very difficult during the storm. I have been in touch with the administration directly. For example, just to give you an idea, Secretary Chow, Secretary of Transportation, before the storm. The administration was very aggressive, working with the state and the local communities to be ready. DOT, I chair a subcommittee that deals with both the Department of Transportation and Department of Housing. They have been, the federal government and the secretaries have been exceedingly aggressive to be available to make sure that everything that could be done before the storm was done. Fortunately, as I mentioned, the state of Florida is probably the best prepared state. We have a governor who has been all over this way before. So again, now the federal government has to step in to assist the state and the local governments, and there's going to have to be a lot of assistance. Trust me on that one.
As far as the federal response is concerned, then, Representative, we're at a time where we're discussing it on Capitol Hill, dollar figures for recovery and things like that. Do you have any sense of what it might cost, not only Florida, but where you live particularly to recover?
But I live in the western part of Miami, and that area was, in essence, Dodge, the big one, the big bullet here. What you see there are a lot of tree damage, a lot of fences down. Obviously, power is out. You're going to have some small, I would assume the very slight, from what I've been able to see, very slight roof damage, tiles, things like that. I don't expect the damage in Miami-Dade County to be that severe. I don't know how the storm surge was on the eastern part of Miami-Dade County on the coast. I can tell you that in the areas like Golden Gate, Immokalee, Florida City, Marco Island, I think there is where you're going to see most of the damage. As far as cost estimate, I don't know. It's too early to tell right now, but I will tell you that everybody is out there. What you see now is everybody out there cleaning up, taking shutters down. Obviously, this state is well aware that we are in a hurricane area, so people have shutters up in their homes. And everybody, from what I can tell and what I've seen, people took this storm very seriously. And I think hopefully that will lessen the damage and obviously the loss of life. I was saddened to hear that two police officers, it seems, two law enforcement officers died during the storm, and I'm hoping that we don't have those numbers rise significantly.
Representative Mario Diaz-Balart of Florida, Republican there, serves the 25th District, updating how his area is doing in light of Hurricane Irma. Thanks for your time this morning, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Coming up on our program, we will take another look at the 16th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Joining us for that discussion is the Center for Strategic International Studies, Thomas Sanderson. He'll talk about how safe the U.S. is and potential threats against the U.S. That conversation coming up next. And then later on in the program, Freedom Tower in New York City. That's where events will take place later on this morning, which you can see on C-SPAN, commemorating the 9/11 attacks. Other events planned at the Pentagon, also in Pennsylvania. Here to talk about the anniversary of 9/11 and the state of security in the U.S. homeland is Thomas Sanderson of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He serves as their Transnational Threats Project Director. Good morning.
Thank you, Pedro.
How would you gauge how safe the U.S. is currently?
Well, I think we are fairly safe. And of course, it's very difficult to know exactly how to measure that. But the reality is we have not had a major 9/11 style attack in the United States. We are able to deter folks from doing that through the policies we have, the security we have, the overseas partnerships that provide intelligence for us. So though we have not had that kind of attack, we do have homegrown violent extremists here. We do have over 100 people who've been investigated and arrested by the FBI for activities related to ISIS. So there's not zero threat in the U.S., but we are managing it pretty well.
So the policies that you spoke about previous, specifically what has worked when it comes to security in the U.S., particularly right after 9/11?
Well, certainly pushing security outward to our partners in improving the detection of people trying to come into the United States, picking up information on things like bomb plots by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula out of Yemen to put bombs on aircraft coming to the United States, detection at home, customs and border protection, detecting individuals who've come in any number of ways, primarily through aircraft. So those are a number of policies that have been put in place, strengthened, and they are working.
When it came to the 9/11, right after when the 9/11 Commission was formed, things like one of the things they spoke about, particularly in the United States, was this idea of stovepiping of information, keeping things. Yes. Is that information sharing getting better amongst the departments here in the U.S., particularly as you spoke about looking at other partners too?
Without a doubt, information sharing in the United States has improved greatly. You do have more than 250,000 employees at DHS. You have thousands, tens of thousands of others across the law enforcement and intelligence communities that are relevant to Homeland Security, but also our security overseas. It is never perfect. There are cultural differences. There are battles over budgets, over credit for bringing intelligence to the president or to others. But we do have a culture of sharing. Not perfect. We do have a lot of people who are dedicated, who are patriots, who are working inside our government and outside of our government and in law enforcement at the local, regional, state, tribal level that are working together. Again, nothing perfect, but we all understand the nature of the threat.
Thomas Sanderson is our guest. He is here to talk about the security of the U.S. homeland. If you want to ask him questions, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, and Independents, 202-748-8002, and you can post thoughts on Twitter at CSpanWJ. What's going on in Europe, particularly when it comes to the threat there? What should the United States be most concerned about?
We should be concerned about individuals in the United States copying what they've seen in Europe, in Berlin, in Sweden, in Barcelona, in London, in multiple locations across France. You've seen vehicle ramming. The spokesman, late spokesman Adnani of ISIS said that if you can't attack, if you cannot come to Syria and Iraq, attack these Western infidels with your foot, with a knife, with a punch, with a kick, with a rock, with a vehicle. So all of these options remain open, and we've seen the art of the possible inside of Europe as well as other places, Israel, for example, where an individual with a car can ram people. You're never going to know what that person's doing until the last second. And these are usually individuals. They have very low signatures. They don't give off signs that they're going to attack. This is what we should worry about with regard to Europe and other things, including probably 4,000 to 5,000 Europeans with European passports who are under the visa waiver program and can travel to the United States. Now, that doesn't mean they just walk in without someone examining them or potentially spotting them, and Congress is looking at this right now. The visa waiver program is essential to our economy and tourism and culture and our family ties, but it is a potential vulnerability here with so many Europeans having gone to fight with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and others, and having that passport that allows them to come into the United States.
Would you say that the nature of those who would threaten us now, is it a centralized thing or is it more decentralized? And if that's the case, what does that prove for the U.S.? What challenges does it prove?
Well, certainly ISIS is more decentralized as an organization now because their back is against the wall. They pivoted long before we took Mosul and now have taken most of Raqqa. So cadres, resources, individuals, equipment has been pre-positioned and sent forward into Europe. So those are things that we do need to be concerned about that are already out there. So it is a decentralized threat, but there's still some control from al-Baghdadi, from other leaders out there, from groups that we should be concerned about. But we should also remember that most terrorist activity, most insurgent activity that we see out there that we often mistake for terrorism is about local battles. But we should all remain vigilant because bin Laden said to his followers before we left, don't focus on the UK, focus on the United States. Baghdadi clearly would like to injure the United States, so we are not in the free at all.
Our guest, before his work at CSIS, he served as a corps instructor and consultant for the U.S. government on issues of terrorism and geopolitics. And from 1998 to 2002, he worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Office of Counterterrorism. Thomas Sanderson, our guest. Our first call for you is from Wayne, and Wayne is in Weaver, Alabama. Independent line. Wayne, you're on with our guest. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, guys.
Morning, Wayne.
I do have a question about the Islamic terrorist training camps that are in America, and what is being done about that?
Well, I'm not aware of any specific training camps. I can tell you, though, that the FBI, local, state, tribal, and other police forces do an excellent job of discovering any potential training facilities. And of course, we have had groups of individuals in the United States who've engaged in their own private training in the countryside, even in cities, where they gathered together, did paintball exercises, made plans, surveilled targets, practiced counter surveillance. So though these individuals do exist in the United States, I'm not sure if we have formal training camps for terrorists at this point.
Tony in Maryland, hi.
Yeah, good morning, C-SPAN.
Morning.
C-SPAN, you have another war fear-mongering guy on there to, I guess, scare everybody again, right? Since it's September 11th. C-SPAN, I'm disappointed in you. I'm very disappointed in you. Let me speak to this gentleman here, though. Sir, I'm not one of these ones out here that believe that 9/11 was done by the people that you said did it. I just don't believe it. There's no evidence to support it. Matter of fact, there's plenty of evidence to support otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
The video of the Pentagon attack is one piece of evidence, which does not look like a commercial aircraft. The video of the plane that went down in Shanksville does not look like that there was anybody in that plane. There's so much evidence out there, and people are starting to understand, come to an understanding of what really happened on that day. So nobody wants to hear your nonsense about terrorists.
Well, Tony, we invited him on to talk with folks like you. Mr. Sanderson, go ahead.
Well, Tony, I don't share your particular point of view on this. I think the evidence certainly is proven and is available that shows who did this, how they were supported, what their plans were. Very exhaustive studies were done on this, and investigations were done on this from multiple agencies and multiple non-governmental groups. So I think it's quite clear what happened on 9/11, and so that's. To
his point, why do you think this persists, though? These ideas.
Well, I think it persists because a few reasons. One, there are individuals in the United States who do not trust our government, who feel that the government does conspire to do things on this level. Number two, because the United States has had relationships with fighters in the past, supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, for example, many of which then eventually became part of al-Qaeda, that feeds this conspiracy that perhaps the United States is behind this, or those that we claim are behind it are not actually the actual perpetrators. I think those are two of the key reasons.
San Diego is next, independent line. Bruce, go ahead. You're on with our guest, Thomas Sanderson.
With 9/11, I think, and it seems to be that much attention is covering up domestic terrorism. What is the state of that in terms of threats to the United States? I'm talking specifically neo-Nazis and KKK.
Well, you're right to bring that up, and though this is the anniversary of 9/11, excuse me, I do think it is appropriate to address the threat presented by neo-Nazis, KKK, and other hate groups. We clearly saw what they're capable of doing in Charlottesville, but we have many examples this year and in previous years of the attacks that they have carried out against largely minorities in the United States. So it is a significant and serious threat, and I know that the FBI and other law enforcement agencies are looking at this. So I'm confident that it's being pursued, but it is relevant to bring it up, and I applaud you for doing that.
What about this idea of recruitment, particularly as we know much more about how individuals who commit these acts are recruited, how it's done particularly? Yeah. What is the U.S. response, and is it getting better to deter that?
Well, recruitment is very difficult. It's hard for communities, family members, law enforcement, and others to detect individuals who are radicalized, which is where countering violent extremism is very important. We bring various elements of the community in to, detect individuals who may be considering this. Unfortunately, grants for CVE programming at Homeland Security have been pulled, and that is one thing that I think is heading in the wrong direction. But as a country, I think we do a pretty good job of detecting detecting that in most cases. There are places in the United States where you do have pockets of individuals who are not well integrated into American society. And again, a safe haven for an individual is their bedroom, is their own mind. It's very difficult to detect this activity. Many who do seek to conduct attacks talk about it with friends, with compatriots online, and the FBI is often able to intervene here, but it is difficult. We have a big country. We have a diverse country, and we have a lot of social media messages coming in from ISIS, from Al-Qaeda, and other groups that really stimulate the minds of young men who may be marginalized in so many different ways.
You spoke of CVE programs. Can you expand on that? And was the decision to pull funds done by the Trump administration?
Yes, on the second part of that. The CVE funds are meant to help communities, again, detect radicalization and changes in individuals, provide the kind of counseling, provide the kind of help that local authorities can use to prevent young men and some young women from going to these groups. And just to note, the figure I brought up before, over 100 individuals in the United States who've been investigated, with about 60 who've been arrested and prosecuted. It's about 9 men to 1 each individual woman when it comes to radicalization.
From Michigan, Independent Line, Brian is next.
Yeah, hi, thanks. How many people from Muslim countries have overstayed their visas, and what are we doing differently from the 9/11 point to this point? Thank you very much. To round them up. Thank you.
Well, I don't know how many individuals have overstayed their visas from any religious group or ethnic group, and I'm not sure that we're going to be trying to detect those numbers based on that criteria. But it is clear that we have many people who've overstayed in the country, and there are some criminals among them, Muslims, Christians, and all other religions, and we should be pursuing these individuals. But I don't have that figure for you.
Washington, D.C. Ralph, good morning. Calling on our Republican line. You're next.
Hi. Yeah, I'm going to say something probably a little bit more controversial, so just bear with me. I spent 20 years as a contractor for the FAA. I left as a senior principal engineer. My job was to look at MITRE, BDM reports and dissect them. I believed all the stuff on 9/11 until about 5 years later I came across the stuff, and I started doing my own investigation. And no, I don't believe in some media thing. And what I found was, first of all, planes can't fly into a 30-foot hole like they did inside the Pentagon. They don't show you that. They don't show you World Trade Center 7 collapsing. They seem to have technical difficulties all the time with showing that. There's a whole industry now that's been built up around fear-mongering, and these guys are getting big salaries, and they shredded the Bill of Rights with the so-called Patriot Act. You know, it was an inside job. There was the organizations you're talking about, like NIST, who did their report. They said, did you find any explosives? And NIST said, no, we didn't find any explosives. And then they asked them, did you look for explosives? No, we didn't look for explosives. Well, how are you going to find them unless you look for them? And all you have to do is look at those buildings. And the word is getting around, and people are getting tired of this fear-mongering every time and bringing people on board whose whole career is fear-mongering, and they get their salary from this whole thing of chasing, you know, so-called terrorist groups down.
Okay, Ralph. Well, major point.
Well, let me say to Ralph, I've been in 70 countries. I've done field work on this topic in 70 countries. I've interviewed over a dozen militant groups. And let me tell you, there is nothing fake about the threat that is out there. It is real. I don't have Ralph's expertise at the FAA, but I don't share his theory on the fact that he's suggesting this was an inside job. There are a number of threats out there that continue to target us and will continue to target us. This is very real.
He brought up the Patriot Act. He brought up surveillance. What's been the long-term effect of that, particularly stemming from 9/11?
Well, there are a number of effects. I mean, certainly on Ralph's side, there are individuals, and I think the majority of individuals feel that they have less privacy. But on the other hand, there are individuals who feel that, you know, we are safer. And of course, it's you don't want to trade that off. But in the world we have today, there are some trade-offs. Just as when you and I go to the airport, when Ralph goes to the airport, we allow ourselves to be checked, and we trade that privacy, that right to privacy for that moment in order to fly safely on airplanes. So Patriot Act has done a number of things that are good. It has certainly eroded some of our civil liberties. And unfortunately, these are the things we struggle with today in an era of multitude of threats, both domestic and foreign, but largely foreign. And the need to protect ourselves in the flying public, and many others who get on the metro today, who get on a ship, get in a car, walk into a building. These are things that we need to be concerned about.
Our guest wrote an op-ed, by the way, if you want to read it online. This stems from August. Terrorism will forever haunt us if nations stand by idly. You can find it at the Hill website. This stemmed from the Barcelona attacks. What's the point you were trying to make?
Well, the point is that if you do not share information and do it effectively, that you could end up getting bitten badly, as the Spanish did. However, when it comes to attacks in Spain, like any other country, struggles with multiple sources of information and intelligence coming in, and the CIA did send them information about potential attacks in Barcelona. But that could have been one of 100 pieces of information that came in that week, that month. We just don't know, and it's hard to say and to incriminate the Spanish on this, because they're struggling like any other country is on this. The broader point is we need to continue improving information sharing. There's good information sharing between the United States and its allies, but within and across our allies, the information is not as good. The cultural differences, the procedural differences, the legal differences, privacy laws. And even within countries, a country like Belgium is riven by so many divisions, and it's very difficult for them to coordinate information sharing.
Missouri, St. Robert, Missouri, Democrats line. Al, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I wish he would tell the truth, and everybody would understand this. We've been in Pakistan since 1986 during Desert Storm. Reagan started that war, and they know Reagan started that war, and they're not going to tell the truth. We've been in Pakistan since 1986, and he needed to tell the truth. Thank you.
Well, my comment on Pakistan is that it is one of our most difficult partners in the battle against terrorism. Pakistan has a number of policies that enable militant groups, but they are also partners with ours in terms of pursuing militant groups. They have their own local interests and policies and goals, and violent extremist groups can sometimes help achieve those goals. But Pakistan does sacrifice a lot, and again, it's almost a Jekyll and Hyde approach with this country. And they are not the only country that's like that. We have countries that have been the source of the ideology that underpins this, Saudi Arabia, but also provides us with tremendous intelligence on the threat itself. And that list goes on and on and on, where we have imperfect partners, and I would put Turkey high on that list.
Indiana, independent line. Jim, go ahead.
Hi. I just want to say that I think it's so disrespectful to call into this program and talk about conspiracy theories to those people, those thousands of people's lives who were touched by that tragedy. And for anyone to believe that our government, our country somehow conspired to do something so tragic and so terrible, it's just sick. It's sick to think that way and believe those things. And that's really all I have to say about it. I just think that those families need to know that there are those of us out here who have the respect to know the price that was paid that day for those people. And that's about all I have to say about it.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate those thoughts. And of course, on an anniversary of 9/11, those are ever important to state out there. And of course, these conspiracy theories are not founded. This would be an outrageous thing for our government to do. It would also be an extremely difficult thing for the government to have succeeded in doing.
2 times the president has tried to impose some type of travel ban. Those were legal challenges. Talk about what the president's proposal is, what you think the effectiveness of that would be, and the challenges, I guess, legally that are coming from them.
Well, we've seen the challenges, and they are significant from a number of courts, a number of parties who are challenging the president on this. To be able to say a certain group of individuals based on their religion is not allowed in the United States, and that was his clear intent from the very beginning. It is not effective either. We have individuals inside this country who are not Muslim. We have individuals coming inside this country threatening us from outside who are not Muslim. And of course, he left off countries that are very important that produced much higher numbers of members for ISIS that did not make the list. Part of this is clearly political and economic in its tone and in its makeup. So it is not a wise policy.
One of the justifications is to allow the government to improve the vetting sources, or at least the process of vetting. What do you think that current standard of vetting is here in the U.S., and how can it be improved?
The current standard of vetting for individuals who are coming in this country is extraordinary. If you come in here as a refugee, it is very, very difficult for you to get through that process. It is many, many months long. We have an excellent standard for that, and that is not the issue here. This is a political issue.
From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this is Mary Ann on our Republican line. Good morning.
Yes, hi. I'd like to know about the FBI agent that was caught driving a terrorist in Texas to one of the terrorist attacks that happened in Texas, and also about the $3.2 billion worth of military equipment that was given to someone inside the United States with night vision goggles and M6 rifles that they use military power. I'll wait for your answer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marianne. I think she's referring to this woman who worked at the FBI who consorted with a known terrorist. I don't know many details about that, but I do know that that she was caught, that she did cooperate, provided information to the FBI, of course, after having been caught. And I don't know much of the details beyond that, but that is very frightening. And Marianne is right to bring that up, that to have someone inside the FBI doing that is quite scary. But no agency is ever immune to that kind of thing, though it is extremely rare. On the $3.2 billion in equipment, I believe she's probably talking about the Trump administration's reversal of providing excess military equipment to police departments, which President Obama curtailed sharply after what happened over the last couple of years with respect to excessive police force against civilians, largely minorities. I do think it is dangerous to put into the hands of police departments military-grade equipment. There are specialized teams that require specialized materials, from armor plating on vehicles and sniper rifles. But they've always had those for some time. I do think we do need to be very careful about providing military-style weapons that are designed for warfare in police departments in domestic situations.
This is our guest, Thomas Sanderson of Center for Strategic and International Studies. He is the project director for the Transnational Threats Program and served at the Defense Intelligence Agency's Office of Counterterrorism. That was from 1998 to 2002. What is that Defense Intelligence Agency program?
Sure, let me clarify. My bio says I worked for a contractor called Science Applications International Corporation. I joined them in 1998 right out of graduate school for a fantastic job to look at factors and indicators that would warn us that terror groups were going from conventional weapons to weapons of mass destruction. And so this contract was with the Defense Intelligence Agency, and that was my main client or customer for those 4 years I was there. And what we did was we looked at the three main instances of the use of WMD in the past, and that was the Sri Lankan Armed Forces, use of chlorine gas. It was Aum Shinrikyo cult in Japan using the sarin gas. And it was a small cult in the Dalles, Oregon that used salmonella on salad bars. Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, if you remember that incident, to poison individuals and sicken them. So we looked at those as well as a number of things, the social science literature on this. This was all open source and unclassified, to help determine when a militant group would make that transition. What is it about their activities, their membership, their language, when they start to dehumanize people, when they move to certain places, when they begin to isolate, when they engage in groupthink, where they can disperse a certain level of guilt in using these kinds of weapons. So I did that for 4 years, and it provided some insights on what those factors and indicators may be.
Because you take a look at that kind of thing, what were your thoughts then on 9/11 by the use of aircraft for this type of destruction?
Sure. So we were not looking at aircraft. My team was not looking at aircraft at the time, but I'm certain individuals were, and concerned about that possibility. It had been raised in studies before, both government studies and non-government studies, that aircraft could be used like this. Of course, aircraft have been targeted in the air and bombed and blown out of the air in many, many instances. Pan Am 103, Air India, lots of instances where bombs on board. But not a lot of people thought about them being turned into cruise missiles, and that is what we saw, and that was what was the innovation on the part of Al-Qaeda, and today remains a threat. Aircraft are a primary target. They are tier 1 target. They are highly visible. The impact on the economy and on the psyche and on the morale of the country and the traveling public would be profound if they were to strike again in that way.
Because the levels of securities at airports now, do you think that this could be repeated as far as the use of an aircraft?
Well, it would be very difficult to get 4 individuals on board who could then take over the aircraft because of the doors on the cockpit. That would be difficult. Getting a bomb on board, of course, we've seen that's possible, and that's happened in a number of other countries. We saw it in Egypt with the Russian charter aircraft. We've seen it in Somalia. We've seen it in other places where that has happened. In Russia, it has happened a couple of times with Chechen Black Widows. So getting individuals on board to then take over the aircraft to then use it as a cruise missile, that seems to me near impossible, because getting in there into the cockpit is that difficult.
Yonkers, New York, Republican line. George, go ahead.
Yes, thank for your call, answering my call. I'm calling about this 9/11 situation. It's all feasible for the government to do this. Remember Operation Northwoods, the Kennedy administration. Remember the Bay of Tonkin, Lyndon B. Johnson. And this 9/11 thing started from 1991 or before, when George W. Bush Sr. Tried to take over Russia, and a coalition ended up into 2011 when he had a $240 billion securities stock needed to be cleared on September 12th.
Got it, George. Thanks.
George, I don't share your view on the conspiracy element of this, that the government was in on this. It's certainly true that our government, that essentially any government on the planet today, has engaged in some pretty awful activities, but this is way beyond the pale, and that would be outrageous to kill 2,900 people from 90 plus countries. Just is not true and did not happen.
In just a few moments, we will take you to the White House moment of silence on this 9/11 pictures that you've seeing on the screen right now leading up to that. Until then, our conversation with Thomas Sanderson of CSIS will take place. We'll pause for a moment to watch the White House ceremonies, and then we'll resume our conversation. John, this is Dan in Independence, Oregon.
Yes, hello. I wanted to ask the person, in the last 5 years in the United States, how many innocent people have been killed by terrorists and how many innocent people have been killed by the police? Thank you very much.
That is Dan from Oregon. Dan, I don't know the exact numbers of how many people have been killed in the last 5 years by terrorist incidents and by police, but certainly my guess is that the number by police is much higher than by terrorism. Terrorism generates an inordinate amount of fear compared to the number of individuals who've been killed, at least inside the United States. But it is that ability to generate that fear that is so awful. And of course, we have seen a lot of violence on the part of some police officers in this country, and the numbers are pretty high. But I don't know the exact numbers and therefore can't offer you a comparison.
From Ohio, Independent Line, John is next.
Yes, Mr. Sanderson, thank you for what you do and what your organization does. I hope you can hear me. I'm talking loud enough.
I can, John. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so happy that the president called these people the losers that they are. I think they should be referred to as cowards, all the way from that one that bombed Oklahoma down there. Whoever does this should be called cowards. Yeah. And don't be grossed out by this. But these people don't like pigs, right? They should be buried in a pig bladder. Well, we can tell them that we use those in football, and the old ones we're going to bury them in. As far as the ones that commit suicide to kill people, they kill their own people that way. These people should never be referred to as anything but cowards, and that stigma will stick with them.
Well, I share your view that they should be called cowards. I do not share your view with regard to associating their death with pigs, and I think that's pretty awful. But nonetheless, these are awful people. and they deserve to be treated in a very firm way, and we do that. We are doing that overseas, we're doing it here, but overseas we have an aggressive posture with special operations, with drones, with intelligence sharing and gathering, with strike aircraft, but I want to point out that counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, these are efforts that demand much more than military-centric activity, much more than what is referred to as kinetic activity. We will not achieve durable, long-lasting solutions to the threat we have today unless we do the whole approach to this, and that is making sure we do a good job on counter-violent extremism, countering these foreign fighters, countering the messaging, which is exceptionally difficult and should not be done by the U.S. government, but by civic institutions. There are a whole range of things that we need to do that we are not doing, that this government is not serious about doing. We have not resourced those efforts, and I hear this from intelligence officers, from special operations officers, from folks across government, from left, right, and middle. We are not doing the kind of serious effort that we need to do to really reduce the threat out there. It is not just bombing. We are very good at that, but that is just one of the issues that we need to be
successful.
So
things that we're not doing, what's on the top of the list?
On top of the list is encouraging strongly and doing as much as we can to essentially force it, good governance overseas to stop the flow of individuals. So good governance, socioeconomic development, trying to reduce sectarianism, religious and ideological radicalization. Socioeconomic development is huge. Most of these young men that join are marginalized culturally, economically, politically, religiously. They are on the sidelines. They have deficits in their life, and joining a violent extremist group provides sustenance for them. It gives them a sense of purpose, dignity, and respect, and income, camaraderie, divine sanction. These are things that they lack at home, often in repressive regimes, but in democratic societies too. So there's a big deficit out there for a lot of young men, and radical preachers, radical individuals manipulate that need.
So improve their economic situation, you reduce the
doubt.
cost. So is that a U.S. tax dollar thing? Is that funds from the U.S. and other countries things? What's the best way to minister?
Well, that's part of the mix there, but it is certainly engaging these countries where you find this happening and where you find the numbers so high. Tunisia, for example, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and these are allies of ours, but there are large numbers of individuals coming from those countries who are joining these groups, and it is about being better at governance. It is being better towards your citizens and protecting your citizens. My colleague, Dr. Anthony Kortsman, often says that when we look at counterterrorism, we can't just look at the groups, we need to look at states that are terrorizing their own people. And we need to use whatever leverage we can, and there's no country with the leverage the United States has, to push policies that do improve job making, job production, good governance, in an end, not an end to corruption, let's be realistic, but reduced levels of corruption.
We are just a few minutes away from observing that White House moment of silence. Diana from Texas, Democrats line, go ahead with your question or comment, please.
I just want to tell Mr. Sanderson, thank you for presenting facts. It saddens my heart that so many people in America believe in conspiracy theories. Again, Mr. Sanderson, thank you so very much for presenting the facts. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana, and good luck down in Texas. I hope you were not hit by the hurricane.
Harley in Ohio, Republican line, go ahead.
Yes, I have a comment and a question. I was a 9/11 first responder called out to deploy at Ground Zero on 9/12 for about 6 weeks. But I've been thinking about this a long time. I read somewhere that the terrorists, they actually their families get rewarded and get high schools named after them. Is there any mechanism to seize the assets of terrorists' families, their extended families, so that a terrorist might be deterred because he knows his mother is going to wind up in poverty?
Thanks, Harley.
Sure. I don't know what the specific policies are overseas with regard to being able to seize the assets of the families of terrorists. I do know that in some countries they do round up the entire family, and that unfortunately can often generate more terrorist activity as you radicalize those young men and girls. when you use that sort of wholesale approach, and that is present in so many of the countries where I've done research. But I don't think in the United States that they would do that here.
Thomas Sanderson will remain with us as we go to the White House to observe the moment of silence.
Ready, step.
The President of the United States and the First Lady participating in the moment of silence at the White House. We go back to our conversation with Thomas Sanderson of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Your thoughts on 9/11? Where were you?
I was at this place of business, SAIC, out in Tyson's Corner. And I remember my boss indicating that something was happening. We didn't have TVs and the ability to live stream at the time, so we all went down into the basement. And I had actually reported to the Pentagon for an assignment that Monday. And my boss had called me in early to work on something for another office, and we all were downstairs. And I just remember it vividly, as I was just saying, on a day like today, and how frightening that was. And once you got the second building confirmation hit and then the Pentagon, you really felt a sense of siege that we were under attack. And of course, we had no idea by whom. And so that was the first time in my life I had felt that.
Let's go to John in Mississippi, Democrats line. John, thank you for waiting. Go ahead.
Well, I'll never forget this day. I had just dropped my son and daughter off to school. At the time, I was a table game manager at a local casino. And as soon as I dropped them off, I go into the home, I look on my TV, and I see a plane that's hit the Empire, the World Trade Center. And I was like, just didn't know what to. I was like, I didn't know what to say. I called my wife and I told her. She said, "We're at war." She was like, "Oh, it's just an accident." But prior to me having this profession, I was an air defense, Stinger air defenseman in the military. So I just assumed naturally that that we had Stingers at the Pentagon, that we had Stingers at the White House. And I had made a comment earlier, like a week earlier, because there had been a hijacking I think it was in Egypt or in Turkey. And I was like, just made a comment in the break room, well, all they have to do to really mess this country up is just hit Wall Street or hit the Capitol. We're going to argue and fight about politics or hit the White House. And so for it to happen 2 weeks later and then to drop my kids off and go to work, I had so many coworkers looking at me like, and rightfully so, rightfully so. A person that has information about such a tragic thing, and I'm crying, and but nobody knew about my military career prior to this job. But I mean, it was just a horrific day for me, and I just, God bless America. I would give my life for this country then and now, and I just please stop the conspiracy theories, America. It's not good. Not good for the world. It's not good for us.
John, thank you so much.
John, thank you for your service, and you did put your life on the line by joining the military, and appreciate that you did that. And with the kind of knowledge you had and many others had prior to 9/11, you must have looked at this as a possibility, and then it must have scared the daylights out of you that it actually did happen. And certainly your coworkers must have been surprised too by your prediction. But this is an awful thing, and want to also thank you for calling out the conspiracy theories, because a lot of people did die, not only on that day, but tens of thousands thereafter in the effort to counter Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and ISIS and many other groups. And they made awful sacrifices, as many have.
That was Rich in Ohio. Let's go to Jim, Fresno, California. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Jim in California. And it's tragic what happened in 9/11. About 1,200, 1,300 people died or something like that. Anyway, what's more tragic and nothing's paying attention to is the 440,000 deaths in hospitals, hospital admittance. every year, and it's going on, and that's more than what's happening in the 9/11. Nothing's done about that. 440,000 of that 440,000, 30% are due to the hospital, the people at the hospital. The others do the doctors in the hospital, and that's for admittance. What about what happens in regards to people that don't go to hospitals?
Okay, Jim.
Yeah.
Comment if you wish.
Well, sure. I remember during the Clinton administration where President Clinton did look at this issue of the very high number of deaths from infections and accidents inside U.S. hospitals, which was a stunning number to me. But we have, over 35,000 car deaths per year. I mean, there are many things in the United States that kill many more people than 9/11, but these are, for the most part, accidents, so we don't look at them in the same way that we do a plot from overseas meant to instill fear across America and to kill almost 3,000 people.
We tend to focus on the Middle East when it comes to looking at these sources of problems. Are there other hot spots that we should be paying attention to?
Without a doubt. South Asia, of course, is a big hot spot where Afghanistan and Pakistan are. North Africa and the African Sahel, so just below the Sahara, is an area that my colleague Jennifer Cook and I traveled to recently to look at what's happening in Nigeria with Boko Haram, in Mali with AQIM, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and many other groups. Tomorrow I depart to Southeast Asia, which is another hot spot. One of the main concerns that we've been looking at through the Transnational Threats Project at CSIS is this phenomenon and threat of foreign fighters. We don't know the exact numbers, but anywhere between 35,000 and 41,000 fighters since 2012 came to the Syria-Iraq battlefield to join ISIS and the other groups that are present. And many of them have been killed. Of course, we're talking about potentially thousands of them being Europeans and coming to the United States, but others coming from 120 countries are still battling there in the remnants of the Islamic State, the caliphate that they declared, but some are going home. And in Southeast Asia, we've seen the first flare fire off, and that is in the city of Marawi in the island of Mindanao. You've had more than 80 foreign fighters show up to join two ISIS affiliates, the awful Abu Sayyaf group, one of the most evil, despicable groups on the planet today, in the Maute group. And you had fighters from Chechnya, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Morocco, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and even Singapore who joined the battle supporting Abu Sayyaf group. Over 125 Philippine police and security forces have been killed, more than 500 militants killed, and more than 40,000 people displaced. Now, this is not the first time we've had activity in Southeast Asia, but Indonesia and the Philippines are the two key issues down here. But you also have ethno-nationalist insurgencies, as we're seeing in Rakhine State in Myanmar, as you have in southern Thailand on the Thai-Malay border, and as you have in other parts of Mindanao in the Philippines. Now, these are different from groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but they could become the cause célèbre of these groups coming in to defend Muslims where they are a minority. And these are Catholic and Buddhist countries we're talking about, Catholic majority and Buddhist majority countries. And what's happening to those individuals who are seeking autonomy. These are Muslims who are not ISIS and Al-Qaeda. These are Muslims who are seeking to essentially run their own lives free of government interference. And those kind of battles, as we're seeing, could draw in people. What we see in Marawi, the Philippines, that is an ISIS battle. These are bad people. They've been trained and hardened in the battlefields of Syria, Iraq, and maybe Libya, and they have now made their journey to the Philippines, and they're engaging in a new battlefield. That should concern us all.
From Tampa, Florida, Independent Line, John, you're next.
Yes, I'd like to thank the guest. His expertise and aggressiveness in protecting ordinary Americans from Muslim extremist psychopaths that are hell-bent on indeed killing us. It's a real threat, of course. Anyway, but I do need to correct him on one thing. Donald Trump's travel ban was not against Muslims like the fake news media would have us believe, but rather it was against countries that are in such disarray that you can't verify these people through their countries. Countries that were in shambles, like Syria, for instance. It wasn't against Muslims. It was against Muslim people that came from countries where these terrorists exist and where the countries are in such disarray, they couldn't be verified as safe to enter America. That's all. And thanks again for your service, sir.
Yep, you're welcome, John. Thanks for your comments. You know, some of those countries certainly are in disarray. Yemen, among them, is high in that list and cannot control its borders. But there are many, many threats coming from other countries that did not make the ban, and that is for geopolitical reasons.
Republican line from Arkansas. Dean, hello.
Hello. I want to thank the speaker, the guest that you have. Plus, I want to honor all the 3,000 plus that died during in New York and the Pentagon. Plus, I want to also honor the 4 that died on 9/11 in Benghazi. Now, for conspiracy people, let's give them a little meat on that. Okay, it was the government who caused 4 deaths. So if they want to chew on something on conspiracy, why don't they chew on that? The 9/11.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there, caller. I'm sorry.
Well, there certainly are a number of opinions on what happened in Benghazi and who knew what and when they knew it. But I don't want to get into the Benghazi issue at this point. But certainly tragic that we lost 4 individuals there. Any Americans and any innocent individual, American or not, a loss of life there is awful.
And looking at the Trump administration's handling of issues of security, what are you particularly paying attention for from this administration when it comes to security of the homeland?
Well, the CVE grants we talked about, the countering violent extremism grants, I think that is a problem. But the president and the Department of Homeland Security, which is staffed by a lot of career individuals, the vast majority, they are doing a good job. They are working hard. We need to keep our eye on the ball, and I believe the president is doing that. He is certainly putting a lot of emphasis on immigration, and there is a finite amount of resources, but I think DHS as a whole is doing an effective job. They have a very difficult job, and they have hundreds of thousands of employees, and it's difficult to execute all the time. But the president's doing that. On other security issues, intelligence leaks, also the president's cavalier attitude towards sharing intelligence with adversaries is a concern of mine. But the president's assertive stance on pursuing militants overseas is good. We just need to add a lot more to that on the non-military side.
Thomas Sanderson with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Pedro.